Well, we've come a long way. We've still got a long way to go, but we've come a long way so far in this series. And of course, the last few times we've considered cataclysm of different types within the land of Israel. But now we're moving on. We're moving on into the future. And we have an earthquake to anticipate. And I need to do this in two parts because there's so much material. But I was very happy when I thought of this title for the part one, which is the day before Pentecost. And actually it's quite relevant, therefore, to do this talk on this day. Now, Shavuot in Israel was last week. But tomorrow is Pentecost Sunday. So to give this talk the day before Pentecost seems to be very relevant as far as I'm concerned. Now, in our last talk, when we were bringing ourselves up to date with earthquake in the land of Israel, I showed this article, or headline really, that was shown on the Israeli network called Ynet, which is always good to keep in touch with. There's an English-speaking version of it on the net. And this is what it says. Now, this is going back to the day before Christmas 2020, last year. When it says this, a devastating earthquake in Israel is imminent, study shows. We talked about the study to a certain extent, which was all to do with Dead Sea geology. But we showed that as our last slide, more or less, in the last talk. So this begins our journey into the future. And Haaretz, which is a more left-wing Israeli media outlet, newspaper, had this some time ago, actually before the last Ynet one, which is Israel is hundreds of years overdue for a massive earthquake. Swarms of tremors are more in the norm in northern Israel, where towns have been toppling by earthquakes since civilization began, but the Galilee isn't the region causing Israel's geologists to lose hair. I've lost my hair already, but they're in the process of losing their hair. We are overdue for a massive earthquake. It's a fact. Now, amazingly, as I was preparing this talk, I came across this leaflet, which is produced by the State of Israel. It's also in English. You can download it, as I did, and then I used one side of it for this presentation. Preparing for an earthquake in Israel. If there's anybody out there who wants to have a PDF of this, I can send it because I downloaded it. People can find it for themselves. Under the title, you've got these words: devastating earthquakes have struck our region in the past, and the occurrence of another severe earthquake is just a matter of time. If we get ready for it today, we will save lives. So this is published by the Israeli government, and it's to encourage us in our buildings, in our preparation for the families, in preparing our houses and workplaces. The question that I ask is, what does the Bible say about the future earthquakes? It says quite a bit. And this is the one we're going to focus on in this talk. This is Ezekiel's earthquake. And it says this in Ezekiel chapter 38. When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. And I highlight the words, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. So the question is, at what time? Well, we can answer the question. It's when Gog attacks the land of Israel. So it's easy to answer it. We just turn to what the Bible says. At that time, when Gog attacks the land of Israel. And I thought I'd put this verse in, because in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus spoke to his disciples about cataclysmic events that were coming. And of course he says these words, "See, I have told you ahead of time." Without doubt, Ezekiel 38 is included in this information that when Gog attacks Israel, the land of Israel, there will be a great earthquake. So we have to be prepared for it. But let's think about the context of this passage in Ezekiel 38. In fact, there are two things that we can look at. You know that I'm interested in historical context. There's also the biblical context that we'll come on to. If we are trying to consider the historical context of this prophecy in the book of Ezekiel, we have to ask the question, has it happened in history previously? Because if it has, we need to know about it and take that into account. However, I don't think it has. I think this is still future. The reason that I think it's still future is in fact the biblical context of this passage, Ezekiel chapter 38. It appears to be, and I put it like this, in a sort of chronological sequence in Scripture, starting from Ezekiel chapter 36 and ending in chapter 48. There seems to be a sort of chronological sequence here. It's not quite straightforward. It's not A, B, C, D, E, F, because A has a little bit of F in it, and B has a little bit of F in it as well. For example, the final verse in the book of Ezekiel is this, Ezekiel chapter 48, verse 35. And the name of the city, what city are we talking about? The city I'm going to tomorrow, the city of Jerusalem, from that time on will be the Lord is there. Why would it be called the Lord is there? The Lord is there. We'll come on to things like this. So if we're going to begin this chronological sequence in chapter 36, what can we say about it? Well, it's an overview of the Lord's dealing with his people, that is the nation of Israel, in history and to the present day and into the future. So we go back to Ezekiel chapter 36, verse 16, for example. You can read the whole chapter, it's very relevant. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, when the people of Israel were living in their own land, now we're looking into the past, they defiled it by their conduct and their actions. Their conduct was like a woman's monthly uncleanness in my sight. The Bible speaks about all of these things from a historical perspective. The Lord responded to it, both in the dispersion into Babylon and the dispersion into the nations, beginning in AD 70. So I poured out my wrath on them because they had shed blood in the land. We need to take that on board. And because they had defiled it with their idols, and we need to take that on board. I dispersed them among the nations, and they were scattered through the countries. I judged them according to their conduct and their actions. This is a historic fact that the Lord did this. Ezekiel 36 goes on. I love this passage. I love it. I will take you out of the nations. All right, he's dispersed them into the nations. But I will take them out of the nations. This is Aliyah. I will gather you from all the countries and bring you back into your own land. I will sprinkle clean water on you and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities, including the shedding of innocent blood and idols, and from all your idols. That's what it says. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. That's why it's got something to do with Pentecost. I will remove from you your heart of stone. Believe me, Israel has a heart of stone. It does. And give you a heart of flesh. Once it has a heart of flesh, the Lord pours out his spirit on all flesh. And I will put my spirit in you, as it says, and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. I love this verse, 4 verses actually, because there's a refrain that's repeated 7 times. And I'm highlighting it. I will, I will, I will, I will, I will, I will, I will. This is God's initiative. This is not dependent on me or us. It is what God intends to do, and he will do it. Of course, we pray, we align ourselves with his purposes. But I will, he says, do these things. Now, think about the overview for a second, just clarifying things. This is what God says in verse 19. I dispersed them among the nations. What can we say? Yes, he did it. I had concern for my holy name. Yes. And he says this, which we need to take note of. In Ezekiel chapter 36, the Lord is realistic here about the nation of Israel. It is not for your sake, O house of Israel, that I am going to do these things, but for the sake of my holy name. That's the most important thing for the Lord, is his name. He had concern for his name. And because of that, he says, I will take you out of the nations. He's done it. He's doing it. He will do it. You will live in the land I gave your forefathers, verse 28. He has done it. He is doing it. He will do it, even more so, as we will see in future talks. But there are 2 things that haven't happened yet. This is what he says in that passage that we read. This is one of the I wills. I will sprinkle clean water on you. I will give you a new heart and a new spirit. He will take out a heart of stone and give a heart of flesh. Hasn't done it yet. Okay, we'll come back to that. But in verse 28 it says, you will live. They've been dispersed to the nations, but in the future they will live in the land I gave your forefathers. And I ask the question, but how? How's it going to happen? There is no nation of Israel for 2,000 years nearly. How's it going to happen? And that takes us to chapter 37 of the book of Ezekiel, which is a terrifying vision. This is something like the vision that the prophet Ezekiel has. The beginning of chapter 37. The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? This is what God says, goes on to say a bit later in that chapter. O my people, I am going to open your graves and bring you back up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live. and I will settle you in your own land. This makes me almost cry. I will settle you. It's another I will. How many I wills have we got in this passage? It's God's initiative. He's going to do it. Let's think about this vision then. In Ezekiel chapter 37, there's a valley of dry bones. So what actually did the prophet see? I've often pondered this. Was it Bergen-Belsen? Was it Babi Yar? Was it some of the other pogroms that have taken place throughout the centuries? Well, this picture is actually Bergen-Belsen. I believe this, folks. Some don't, but I do. How awful that day will be. None will be like it. It will be a time of trouble for Jacob, but he will be saved out of it. Now, this is where our Christian minds have a bit of a problem, because most of the time we only see salvation in spiritual terms. This is the influence of Greek philosophy on the way we think about things. But in the Hebraic mind, the physical and the spiritual are not separate. So when we're talking about Jacob being saved, we're talking about the physical resurrection of the land of Israel. How do I know that? How can I prove it? Well, we're encouraged exactly a chapter later, chapter 31, verse 7, by Jeremiah. Make your praises heard and say, O Lord, save your people, the remnant of Israel. What are we saying here when we're asking that the Lord will save his people? Well, we know because of what it says in the next verse. This is how we know that he hears this prayer that Jeremiah encourages us to pray. What is he going to do in response to the prayer of salvation for the remnant of Israel? It's this. Next verse. See, I will bring them from the land of the north and gather them from the ends of the earth. They're being saved, folks. Israel is safe. It's being saved. Of course, this is the day before Pentecost. Of course, what does it lead to? The state of Israel is born. Can a country be born in a day? Or a nation be brought forth in a moment? Isaiah asks the question. What's one of I think we've seen miracles in the last 10 days. I do. I think we have. But what happened the day after the state of Israel was declared? 5 Arab armies, some of them trained by the British, we have some responsibilities here, attacked this new state. Should have been wiped off the map. Should have been wiped off the map then. 1948-49. Didn't happen then. It's not going to happen now, folks. God says, following on that last verse in Isaiah, do I bring to the moment of birth and not give delivery, says the Lord. If the Lord's going to do something, he's going to do it. So we need to think further about this vision in Ezekiel chapter 37. This is what it says. They stand on their feet, a vast or a mighty army. 10 days of conflict in Gaza is a fulfillment of these words, whether we like it or not. the IDF. Some people want to spiritualize this verse. Again, trying to see something different, not just a physical reality. Well, the physical reality and the spiritual are part of the whole. In my opinion, the IDF is the fulfillment of these words in Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 10. It needs a mighty army. And it has one. Also, Ezekiel 37 says something quite interesting. It's a united nation. This is what it says. It's a little technical. We need to know a bit more of the fact that in Ezekiel's day, the nation was divided into two. I'm going to take the stick of Joseph and join it to Judah's stick. That's the north and the south, if you like, making them a single stick of wood. And they will become one in my hand. Again, we got I wills. I will make them one nation in the land. On the mountains of Israel, there will be one king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms. This is what God says. Do the words have meaning? I think they do. The world wants a two-state solution. God is not interested in a two-state solution. There will be just one. A lot's got to happen between now and then. A lot. It's the day before Pentecost, after all. And they will be my people, and I will be their God now and in the future. This is what it says at the end of 37. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord. Make Israel holy, when my sanctuary is among them forever. This is what I'm saying. It's not totally chronological, because each chapter looks towards the end as well, and then it moves on. And this is what it says in Ezekiel 37. His sanctuary is going to be among them forever. These are words that mean something. And at last, we get to chapter 38. So how's this going to happen? So we get to Ezekiel chapter 38. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog in the land of Magog. In future years you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They had been brought back out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. So I want to highlight some points here. We'll look at them individually. In future years, a land that has recovered from war. Now all of them live in safety. Now this, I think, is an important point if we think that Gog and Magog is about to happen. What Gog and Magog is describing is an invasion. We're not talking rockets here, folks. We're talking of an invasion from the north. So this is one of the characteristics of the war that is described in Ezekiel 38. A land that has recovered from war. And all of them, all of the population are living in safety. The question, of course, I'm going to ask many times, is it now? We've seen pictures like this. We've experienced incidents like this for the last 10 days in the strange title, Guardian of the Walls, which is based in the book of Isaiah. I put this together before even this conflict began, actually, which was interesting. I felt at the time that it was somewhat prophetic. But here's a list of some of the missiles that probably most of which are being mass-produced in Gaza. Perhaps not today, but they have been. I just highlight where we are. If they were interested in Iran, we would have had rockets. Apparently they're not. I'm grateful, but other people have faced much more difficult times than me, particularly my friends in Rehovot, where the Weizmann Institute is, Ashdod, Ashkelon, much more in the firing line, Tel Aviv, of course. This is what Ezekiel chapter 38 explicitly says. They're invading a land that has recovered from war. The question that we need to ask is, well, what war are we talking about here? Because it's not clear. Is it World War II? I don't think it's the World War II, because Israel hadn't existed at that point. Is it the War of Independence in 1948-49? It's a possibility. It took some recovering from. I'm not sure about the Six-Day War, whether to include that in this list. One could. Definitely the Yom Kippur War took some recovering from. Israel nearly ceased to exist in 1973. We need to bear that in mind. There were miracles that brought them through that conflict. They've recovered from that. My own feeling is that there's a future war with Hamas. I wrote this before this last conflict, before the ceasefire of this conflict. This is how this conflict began. I found these pictures at the very beginning. This is the Temple Mount, of course, which we talked about, the riots that were taking place on the Temple Mount, which was one of the spark issues. I write this down. I put this in, I should say, because we talked about it previously. In my opinion, possibly the site of the Holy of Holies, the Al-Qas fountain. And of course, we spoke about this verse, and we've lived to see this being played out in the last 2 weeks. It's going to be played out again, folks. Al-Aqsa is a focal point here. I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup. This is the Al-Qas fountain that sends all the surrounding peoples reeling. Some people think they can build another temple on the Temple Mount. I have to laugh at that. It's not possible. Will it ever be possible? That's the question. This is Hamas. They're still existing. But there's this amazing verse in the book of Isaiah. Of course, it's looking into the future when the glory of the Lord is poured out on them. No longer will violence be heard in your land, nor ruin or destruction within your borders. I want to highlight the word violence. Do you know what the word is in Hebrew? Can anybody pronounce that? We're reading from right to left.
Hamas.
Hamas. One day, no longer will Hamas be heard in your land. We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, this I saw the day before the ceasefire, but I thought I would put this clip in. This is Colonel Richard Kemp. This is CUFI, Christians United for Israel, which is a really good organisation, I believe. This is just a little clip of Des Starrett's interview with Colonel Richard Kemp, and he talks about the future. I hope you can hear this. I'm going to turn that up a little bit.
I think, obviously everybody in their right mind wants to see an end to this conflict. But we shouldn't just be looking at this conflict. We should also look forward at the next conflict, because there will be one. There's no doubt about that. And it's very important that Israel is able to do as much damage as they think necessary to the Hamas military infrastructure now, during this conflict, as much damage as they think necessary to severely delay the next conflict breaking out. And it's only Israel that can judge when that damage has been done. It's not the United States, not Great Britain, not the UN. Nobody else can judge that. Only Israel can say when they believe that enough damage has been done. Because if enough damage is not done, both to deter Hamas in psychological terms and also to deprive them of the wherewithal to fight, if that's not done, then the next conflict will occur sooner and more people will die on both sides sooner. So in my view, yes, we all want to see it end, but no, we should not pressure Israel to end it before they feel that they've achieved the objectives they need.
In fact, in the last couple of days, we got things like this. Times of Israel, the next round will be worse. Unless Israel reasserts control of its destiny. Everybody in Israel knows this. This is what one of the top generals says, as reported in the Times of Israel. This Gaza conflict will be a success if it brings 5 years of calm. But this was yesterday in the Jerusalem Post. Hamas celebrates truth victory, warns of future resistance against Israel. This is a photograph that was taken several days ago on the Al-Aqsa Mosque with the flags of Hamas being waved. This is the top of Al-Aqsa. So the question is, a land that has recovered from war, and I ask the question, what war? Inevitably, there's a future war with Hamas. Hamas will have to be defeated if the conditions of Ezekiel 38 are to be fulfilled. This is what the prophecy goes on to say. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. I'll just underline some things. Unwalled, without walls, without gates. The question, of course, is it now? And I show this picture, which is one of the walls that is separating Israel from a Palestinian community in the West Bank. Something's got to happen to change this, folks. You will say, who's the you? That's Gog. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people. Is that true today? Is it? It's not true today. The Israeli military is one of the top militaries in the entire world. They're on alert every moment of the day. They are not peaceful and unsuspecting. Something's got to happen to change the situation. This war that the land will have to recover from is going to be a major conflict. Major conflict. This is what Gog will say. I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living at the centre of the land. I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods. This is Israeli currency, by the way, folks. I got some in my wallet. What can we say about this nation? Innovation and technology, world leaders. Also in desalination, also in solar energy. Scientific research second to none. And I benefited, and so has Carol, from this incredible healthcare that we have here, which is available to all Israeli, Arab or Jew. There's such a lot that the media don't talk about here, folks. But there's still poverty. Israel is not an apartheid nation, but there is very different prospects for the Israeli community from the Palestinian community. That's got to change. Israel has got to work at that and would work at it. There has to be investment in the West Bank and in Gaza, if it could be received, which it couldn't be at this moment. This is amazing. Amazing. Rich in livestock and goods. The Leviathan Gas Field. Well, during the conflict, they tried to take it out. Hamas tried. Amazingly, they didn't. They said, I mean, this isn't so far from Gaza, folks, and yet they missed or didn't even try to do it. But I think they did try to do it. That's what it says in the Jerusalem Post. Yesterday in the Jerusalem Post, Israel tells Chevron to restart the Tamar gas platform after the ceasefire, so it's churning out gas now. This is an amazing little map. It's complicated because this whole area is divided into blocks, some of which are being offered for an auction. Israel is going to receive billions and billions and billions of dollars here, folks. Is it unexpected? This is a fantastic map. Of course, we're going back into the past. This looks at the division of the land into the different tribes, the 12 tribes. And there's one particular that I want to highlight. It's the tribe of Asher. This is where the Leviathan Gas Field is, folks. This is what the promise expressed in Deuteronomy says about Asher. About Asher, he said, most blessed of sons is Asher. Let him be favoured by his brothers, and let him bathe his feet in oil. We've seen nothing yet. We've seen nothing yet. Actually, here's somebody who saw it, who saw the scriptures and realised it's worth really beginning to excavate for oil. I don't think he thought so much about natural gas. Hayseed Stevens. Now, he was such a celebrity, in inverted commas, in the 1980s. For places like the International Celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, Hayseed Stevens, talking about this promise and that there was oil to be discovered. Of course, they discovered the gas. The next will be the oil. And so you have the Leviathan Gas Field that will bring about changes in the Middle East. There's no doubt about it. God will use prosperity to bring peace, I think. Actually, this is what it says in Ezekiel 38. I like this. This is taken from the King James Version. Why do I like it? This is questioning Gog's motives. Art thou come to take a spoil? This is such a prosperous nation. Peaceful, unsuspecting, prosperous. I like spoil here, because you've got oil in it, but you've also got S, which is sulphur, and you've got P, which is potassium or potash. And of course, the Dead Sea is an incredible resource. Art you come to take a spoil? Now, this is interesting. I hope I'm not going on too long. We can break it into two parts if you want, but I'd like to get through it. This is what that same passage speaks about. This is so interesting to me. This is Gog speaking about what he intends to do, or is being questioned about what he might do, and coming against, I will turn my hand against the resettled ruins, and the people gathered from the nations, living at the centre of the land. Isn't that an interesting one? What on earth is that? Living at the centre of the land. Well, in order to understand that, we need to appreciate the Abrahamic Covenant. What does it say? If words mean anything, God is determined here, folks. He remembers, this is in Psalm 105, of course, he remembers his covenant forever, the word he commanded for 1,000 generations, the covenant he made with Abraham, the oath he swore to Isaac. He confirmed it to Jacob as a decree, to Israel as an everlasting covenant. What does he say? To you I will give the land of Canaan as the portion you will inherit. And I've showed this or talked about it in other talks. This is the boundaries of the land of Canaan. You can look it up on the internet. I think this is from Wikipedia, actually. In two places, in Scripture, the land and the boundaries of that land are delineated. The first one is in the Torah, which is Numbers chapter 34, and I've tried to do this in red, and that is corresponding to the red line on the map. But amazingly, the second passage is actually in Ezekiel chapter 47. This is the blue line. Now, Ezekiel 47 is significant because we're looking into the future here. This is, you could describe chapters 40 through 48 as the millennial reign of Jesus in Jerusalem. The two lines are very similar. Actually, geologically, there's going to be a lot of changes between now and then, and maybe that's why they don't quite match up. I don't know whether that's true or not. But what can we say about it? Gaza is in the land. The Jordan River is the eastern boundary. We're not thinking of going east here. The Jordan River is the eastern boundary of the land of Canaan, where the Jordan River exists, of course. Lebanon, this is amazing, isn't it? Lebanon, which is in dire straits today, folks. That's why Hezbollah hasn't done anything, I believe. Lebanon is in dire straits. It's extremely fragile. It could collapse at any moment. But Lebanon is part of the Promised Land. So, if it's not there yet, where are Israel living today? They're living in the centre of the Promised Land, which is a characteristic or part of the scenario into which Gog and Magog come. Yes, it's true. That's today. We're living in the centre of the land. One day, the nation is going to be enlarged. Not east, but north. Actually, probably slightly south as well. Every place, Deuteronomy, where you set your foot will be yours. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the Euphrates River to the Western Sea, according to this boundary. One day it will be said, as prophesied in the book of Isaiah, "You have enlarged the nation, O Lord. You've enlarged the nation. You've gained glory for yourself. You've extended all the borders of the land." However, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll need to come back to that one next time. Let's consider Ezekiel's prophecy. This is an interesting part of it. Ezekiel 38 verse 12. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all her villages will say to you, to who? To Gog, "Have you come to plunder? Have you gathered your hoards to loot and carry off silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods and to seize much plunder?" What does this passage tell us? What it tells us is who is not involved in the invasion. Because they're questioning Gog as to their motives for attacking this peaceful and unsuspecting people. If we think of Sheba and Dedan in Scripture, we're talking of the Arab or certain Arab nations. Saudi Arabia. Actually, this is amazing. That's why I was so encouraged by, in the days of Donald Trump, of course, the Abrahamic Accords, as they were called. Some people criticise them, I don't. Because I believe there will be peace between Israel and the Sunni nations, Arab nations, Sheba and Dedan. But what about the merchants of Tarshish? Who are they? I think, and I can spell it out in more detail, that we're talking of the Western world here, the trading nations of the world, many of them surrounded by coast. This, I think, is why Jeremiah, in his chapter 31, encourages his people to read this. "Hear the word of the Lord, O nations, proclaim it in distant coastlands. He who scattered Israel will gather them and will watch over his flock like a shepherd, which is, I think, what is happening today. I think these distant nations are places where the Jewish people throughout history have been scattered, and there is an encouragement by the Lord to those who live in those nations to encourage his people to return to the land. We could go into that in more detail. Because in Isaiah, in that chapter, which also says that Hamas will not be present in the land anymore, surely the islands look to me. In the lead are the ships of Tarshish, all right? These are the merchants of Tarshish, bringing your sons from afar with their silver and gold. So the Gentile nations are encouraged and commissioned by the Lord to help in the return of the Jewish people to the land. Life for Jewish people in the diaspora is going to get tougher and tougher and tougher, no doubt about it. So then, if we can understand who is not involved in the invasion, who is Gog? And of course I put up this picture. And we have the Abrahamic Accords, you could say the Gog Accords. But I put a question mark here. I'm not anticipating Gog and Magog for several years, perhaps many years. We've got to recover from a war first before we can move into Gog and Magog. So, okay, we've got three people that we know, Erdogan, Khamenei and Putin. But I think in that day it will be their people who follow on in their footsteps. Maybe, maybe not. Some people will disagree. Therefore, Son of Man, prophesy and say to Gog, this is what the sovereign Lord says, in that day when my people Israel are living in safety, there it is again, will you not take notice of it? In days to come, in future years, we've already covered that, O Gog, I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me when I show myself holy through you before their eyes. Going back to the earthquake, we've got there at long last. This was just a preamble. When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there will be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. And of course, we go back to this well-worn photograph, actually taken from Google Earth, I think, which shows the Dead Sea Transform Fault. Okay? Its impact in the history of Israel, past, present, and now we're thinking of the future. This is what it says. As a result of that great earthquake, we have to take the words at face value. All the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. The mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. And we will talk about it more in the next talk. There are local effects, which I have to prepare for, and international effects. All the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. That's what it says. God says this, I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains. On the mountains of Israel you will fall, you and all your troops and the nations with you. We are talking of an invasion. We are not talking about rocketry here. God puts a hook in the jaw of Gog to bring them to the mountains of Israel. So where are the mountains of Israel? There are mountains of Israel in the West Bank. Actually, this is a fantastic map that I found, because you can see the topography. Isn't it amazing? Don't you think? I think it's amazing. that most of the hilly regions of Israel, the centre of the land in other words, are in the West Bank. It's not an accident. It's not an accident. And of course in the heart of that you've got Jerusalem. What does it say in Scripture, in the Psalms? As the mountains, they're not that big, it's not like the Himalayas. As the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people both now and evermore. The mountains surround Jerusalem. You can see it here on the map. What does God say? We'll look at Zechariah 12 on another occasion. I will make Jerusalem an immovable rock for all the nations. But there are mountains in the Golan Heights. Just focus on that map. Of course, the most significant mountain is Mount Hermon, which has got a ski resort on it in the Middle East. There is a lot of snow on Hermon during winter time. Not every winter, but many winters. And that snow is really important because it feeds the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River. I just thought I'd point this out to you because Mount Meron has been in the news. So you can see where Mount Meron is, but there's another mountain, Mount Bentol, which is on the border between Israel, the Golan Heights, and Syria, and was the scene of miracles during the 1973 Yom Kippur War. That's why I put this picture in. And I hope you're still planning to come because I want Hannah to take us to the Golan Heights. We've got to go to the Golan Heights, folks. We don't have a choice. Please book it in your diary. Well, we've not got war now, so maybe next year. We'll see Hannah tomorrow, just to let you know, in Jerusalem. So we'll ask her to be our guide. This is a beautiful picture. This is in the Golan Heights, which is a plateau of volcanic rock. This is what God says in Ezekiel 38. I will execute judgment upon him with plague and bloodshed. This is what God will do to Gog and his hordes, who have been drawn as an invading force to the mountains of Israel. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones and burning sulphur on him and on his troops and on many nations with him. It's plague, biological warfare. We've thought about it, haven't we, in the last couple of days? We've seen nothing yet, folks. Nothing. Bloodshed. The invading force, hordes, fighting each other, as in the day of Midian. We'll talk about that. Rain and hailstones, and what God has done using hailstones. He uses natural phenomena to execute his judgment. And burning sulphur, what's that? Well, this whole region is volcanic. There haven't been volcanic eruptions of late. It is true. We'll wait and see what happens in the future. In fact, this beautiful picture is called the Avital Volcanic Park, which I found. Maybe we'll go there too. This is what it says in Ezekiel chapter 39. I will give you as food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals. You will fall in the open field, for I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. Now, one of the places where we'll visit is the Gamla Nature Reserve, and look at the vultures. It's a place where they breed. I will give you as food. It's on the Golan Heights, of course, that's the point. To all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals. You will fall in open field. That's very significant. Gog will be destroyed on the mountains of Israel in the open field. Not in towns, in the open field. Let's see some of these open fields. There's no commentary on this video clip. This is taken from a clip called Israel Northern Landscapes. It's not just the Golan, but it includes the Golan Heights. It's incredibly beautiful countryside, largely uninhabited, as indeed a lot of the West Bank is largely uninhabited. Remember this point, they fall, Gog and his hordes fall in the open field. We'll go up to the Golan Heights, we have to do that. This is such a beautiful area. It's a very strategic area. This is what was obtained in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, where there were miracles. There's a lot of water that comes down from the Golan Heights to feed the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, obviously at different times of the year. But these are just landscapes. A lot of arable farming, of course, and mountainous regions, the mountains of Israel. And just gives you a little glimpse of some of these places. You can look up more stuff on the internet, because we need to be familiar with where Gog is going to meet his demise. We need to be prepared for this day, because God says to Gog, you will fall in the open field, for I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. And then this amazing verse in Ezekiel chapter 39. It is coming. It will surely take place, declares the sovereign Lord. This is the day I have spoken of. Before we close, last thing, 2 minutes. Let's think over this overview that we found in Ezekiel chapter 36. But looking at it in historical terms. He dispersed them among the nations. He did it. He had concern for his holy name. He had. He has taken them out of the nations. He has. They are, I am, living in the land he gave their forefathers. It's true. But, as we said, 2 things have not happened yet. He will sprinkle clean water on them. He will give them a new heart and a new spirit. When will this happen? We'll talk about it next time, because it's the day after Pentecost. That's it.